Imagine a land of stunning beauty, vast coastlines kissed by the Indian Ocean, lush tropical forests stretching inland, and fertile plains that once promised abundance. This is Mozambique, a country rich in history and potential yet scarred by one of the most devastating conflicts in modern African history. From the late 1970s to the early 1990s, Mozambique was torn apart by a brutal civil war that claimed over 1 million lives, displaced millions more, and reduced much of the nation's infrastructure to ruins. This was not just an internal struggle, it became a proxy battlefield for Cold War superpowers, where ideology clashed with human suffering on an unimaginable scale. The war pitted the Marxist government of Frelimo against the rebel forces of Renamo, in a conflict fueled by regional rivalries and global tensions. Villages were burned, families shattered, and an entire generation grew up amid fear and famine. Yet from this destruction emerged a story of resilience, fragile peace, and the reshaping of southern Africa itself. Tonight we delve into the roots, causes, horrors, and aftermath of Mozambique's bloodiest conflict. A war that not only ravaged one nation, but altered the geopolitical landscape of an entire continent. Colonial roots of conflict. To understand the Civil War, we must journey back centuries to the arrival of Portuguese explorers on Mozambique's shores in the late 15th century. Vasco da Gama's ships heralded an era of trade, but soon gave way to domination. By the 16th century, Portugal had established coastal forts and trading posts, claiming vast territories as their own. Mozambique became a key link in Portugal's empire, a source of slaves, ivory, and later cash crops. For generations, the indigenous peoples Macuat Songa Shona and many others lived under foreign rule, their societies disrupted by the demands of colonial exploitation. The 19th and 20th centuries saw intensified control as Portugal sought to extract maximum profit. Large concessions of land were granted to private companies, often backed by British or other European capital. These companies seized fertile areas, displacing local communities and forcing Africans onto marginal lands. The most grievous burden was forced labor known as chibolo. Men were rounded up, sometimes chained, and compelled to work on plantations, roads, or in mines for little or no pay. Women and children were left to fend for villages, often facing starvation. Refusal meant severe punishment, flogging, imprisonment, or worse. In the early 20th century, under the authoritarian Salazar regime, these practices hardened. The indigenoto system divided the population into civilized assimilados, mostly Portuguese settlers, and a few educated Africans, and the indigenous majority, who were treated as subjects, not citizens. Africans were required to carry identity cards, pay heavy taxes, and submit to forced cotton cultivation, which drained the soil and brought meager returns. Resistance simmered in uprisings like the Buru Revolt in the 1910s, but these were crushed brutally. By the mid-20th century, As winds of change swept Africa, Mozambique's people grew restless. Exiled intellectuals and workers in neighboring countries began organizing. Small nationalist groups formed, sharing ideas of freedom and dignity. The Portuguese responded with repression, arresting activists and tightening control. Yet seeds of rebellion had been sown. In the rural heartlands, elders told stories of lost lands, while in cities a new generation dreamed of self-rule, independence, and broken promises. The armed struggle began in 1964 when Frelimo, the Front for the Liberation of Mozambique, launched its first attacks in the northern provinces. Founded 2 years earlier in Tanzania, Frelimo united various exile groups. Under the leadership of Eduardo Mondlane, a brilliant scholar educated in the United States, guerrillas trained in Algeria, China, and the Soviet Union infiltrated from bases in Tanzania and Zambia, striking Portuguese outposts and mobilizing villagers. Portuguese forces numbering over 70,000 used napalm defoliants and relocated populations into fortified villages or dementos to isolate the insurgents. Yet Frelimo gained ground, liberating large areas in the north where they built schools, clinics, and communal farms. Mondlane's assassination in 1969 by a parcel bomb widely blamed on Portuguese agents shook the movement, but Samora Machel, a charismatic military commander, emerged as leader. In Portugal, the colonial wars drained resources and morale. The 1970 Carnation Revolution, a military coup in Lisbon, overthrew the dictatorship. The new government sought quick exits from Africa. Negotiations followed, and on June 25, 1975, Mozambique became independent with Machel as president. Jubilation filled the streets as the red and green flag rose. Infrastructure lay in ruins from the war. Frelimo declared a one-party Marxist state, nationalizing land and industries, aiming for rapid development. Villagization programs relocated rural people into collective farms, promising education and health care. Yet these policies often clashed with traditional ways, causing resentment, especially in central and southern regions where Frelimo's support was weaker. Economic woes mounted, droughts, sanctions against Rhodesia, and internal mismanagement strained the nation. Disaffected former guerrillas and those opposed to socialism felt marginalized. External forces eyed the instability. Rhodesia's white minority government feared Frelimo's support for Zimbabwean liberation fighters. South Africa's apartheid regime saw a Marxist neighbor as a threat. Civil war erupts, Frelimo versus Renamo. In Rhodesia, intelligence officers recruited dissident Mozambicans, including former Frelimo members, disillusioned with the new government. They formed Renamo, the Mozambican National Resistance, initially to spy on and disrupt Zimbabwean guerrillas, using Mozambique as a base. After Motsangase's death in 1979, Afonso de la Cama took command. They targeted symbols of Frelimo's progress, aiming to make the country ungovernable. Frelimo responded with counter-offensives, but struggled to protect rural areas. Yet Renamo gained recruits from those alienated by Frelimo's policies, forced collectivization, and political repression. By the early 1980s, as Zimbabwe gained independence, South Africa ramped up support training, arming, and supplying Renamo to destabilize its neighbor. The war escalated fiercely. Battles raged in dense bush and mountains. Frelimo's forces sometimes shelled villages or detained suspects harshly. Foreign powers' Cold War Africa. Frelimo aligned with the Soviet bloc, receiving arms advisors and aid from Moscow, East Germany, and Cuba. Cuban troops helped train forces and defend key areas. The Soviet Union saw Mozambique as a foothold in Africa, supporting anti-imperialist causes. On the other side, Renamo embodied Western and regional anti-communist efforts. Rhodesia, then South Africa, provided bases, weapons, and funding, viewing Frelimo as a threat to white rule. The United States under Reagan indirectly supported Renamo through allies, seeing it as resistance to Soviet expansion. South Africa's role was pivotal. Raids into Mozambique killed civilians and destroyed infrastructure. Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Malawi sent troops to guard transport corridors, vital for their economies against Renamo attacks. Mozambique, a young nation, became a chessboard where superpowers and neighbors pursued interests, heedless of the human toll. The true horror lay in the suffering of ordinary Mozambicans. Over 1 million died not just in combat, but from famine, disease, and deliberate starvation tactics. Renamo destroyed crops and farms, creating food shortages. Villages became killing grounds. Survivors recounted nights of terror, rebels arriving, shooting, burning, abducting youth. Massacres like Homoan in 1987 saw hundreds slaughtered, bodies mutilated to instill fear. Women faced systematic rape as a weapon. Boys as young as 10 carried guns, witnessing and committing atrocities, leaving deep psychological scars. Displacement was massive. 5 million fled homes, becoming refugees in neighboring countries, or internally displaced, wandering in search of safety. Camps overflowed with the desperate, lacking food, medicine, shelter. Landmines salted the earth, maiming long after battles ended. Infrastructure crumbled, schools, hospitals, roads gone. An entire generation lost education, growing in fear. Trauma lingered, nightmares, distrust shattered communities. The human cost was incalculable, a nation bleeding from wounds that time struggles to heal. Peace after destruction and a changed Africa. President Joaquim Chissano, who succeeded Machel after his mysterious 1986 plane crash, sought dialogue. Renamo laid down arms. Frelimo accepted multi-party democracy. Yet scars remain. Poverty, landmines, trauma persist. Namibia gained independence. Zimbabwe stabilized. Southern Africa shifted toward majority rule. Mozambique rebuilt slowly. Tourism, gas discoveries promise hope. Yet inequality, corruption echo old grievances. Mozambique's story warns of conflict as cost and peace as fragility. A reshaped Africa, bearing wounds of a bloodiest war.